In order to have a breakthrough, we must face and address
what's wrong with you? Look up, look alive. Ass legs.
Systemic racism.
Let's get moving. Overseer, I want you to bring up the first young buck we have here. He's young, he's healthy, he's with a nice strong back.
There are many residents who don't know about Peter Faneuil, don't know that he was a slave trader.
Okay, I'm open for bidding. 80 pounds.
80 pounds.
Okay, 80 pounds.
There has been a history and there's been a story intrinsic to black people who have been marked black.
Sold for 80 pounds. $16,000.
This is what I got. Anybody else want to buy one of these tickets?
Part of the Faneuil Hall Reconciliation Project is about looking at symbols in our city, such as Faneuil Hall, addressing them in such ways that we bring the city together under the rubric of racial reconciliation, under the rubric of how we work out our racial divide, our racial divisiveness. We are fooling ourselves if we think that we can move forward as a city in terms of being a great city, a multiracial city that's fair, if we don't address some of the tragedies of the past. We are effectively lying to ourselves if we talk only about the greatness of Boston without talking about its pain.
Sold for 60 pounds.
In the 1700s, Peter Faneuil used proceeds from selling an enslaved child to purchase a building that now many call the Cradle of Liberty.
It's a house of horrors. It's a place that does not represent liberty because its roots are grounded in the horror and the tragedy of slavery.
Sold for 70 pounds.
Get over here. Get him quick.
The Faneuil Hall Reconciliation Project also opens up the discussion about possible reparations for Boston's African American community.
So by raising the issue of slavery in Boston, we're raising the issue of how blacks were intimately and intricately involved in the history of this city.
What you're buying here is not just one servant for yourself, you're buying a legacy for the city of Boston from Peter Faneuil.
The United States is a very rich country. One of the richest countries on earth in terms of the amount of money per person.
And Massachusetts is one of the wealthiest states on the planet. New England was considerably the first and principal colony for slave ships. Peter Faneuil, who dealt heavily in the inhumane slave trade, sent his ship, Jolly Bachelor, on a slave voyage to Sierra Leone. However, things took a turn on March 2, 1742. The captives revolted, killing the crew members and the captain. A European merchant recovered the ship and brought back with him 20 of the African captives. Peter Faneuil died before the ship could return to America.
The city has failed to address, its history, but also the legacy of slavery, the economic inequity that it established at the very founding of the city extends from the 1700s to 2018. Blacks suffer in this city over against whites. And there needs to be an opportunity for atonement and repentance, and finally reparations.
And the fact that there have been people and families that have been here and been afforded the opportunities to accumulate such wealth for themselves, to be able to have something to pass down.
Massachusetts' history of accumulating wealth is violent. It begins with the Puritans, who heralded religious persecution, land theft, and genocide onto the indigenous peoples who were here before them. These English settlers, who called themselves Puritans, distorted biblical context to justify their right to own humans and steal indigenous land. Boston's very own celebrated revolutionary Samuel Adams was a Puritan himself.
to think that we are only the place where liberty was fought for and where democracy was born, when in fact, at the same time we were discussing issues of democracy, we were also engaging in enslaving other human beings. From the founding of the country, we've had the issue around racial discrimination where blacks were at one point considered not fully a human being and therefore not able to engage in the democratic process. Africans could not vote.
Enslaved Africans walked the streets of Boston. Their mere existences were subjugated to slavery by the Puritan Church.
Remove the name of Peter Faneuil from a public building.
The Poor People's Campaign, the New Democracy Coalition, and many other friends, we decided that we would put on an event to start that conversation that's really difficult to have, but it's very necessary to have.
And the conversation right now is really speaking about racism.
We need to end systemic racism.